Good morning, everyone. Today, we will discuss environmental cost reporting. This presentation will cover the fundamental concepts of environmental costs, how to analyze relevant questions, and a step-by-step tutorial on preparing an environmental cost report. Additionally, we'll examine a case study to illustrate the practical application of environmental costs in a real-world setting. Once again, we'll be diving into topics related to cost and management accounting, with a focus today on environmental costs. To understand this topic fully, we need to explore what environmental costs are, how to measure them, and the control mechanisms companies commonly implement to manage these costs. First, we will look at the definition first. Environmental costs arise due to poor environmental quality or the existence of several negative potentials that occur due to poor environmental quality. Don't let this company create a bad environment, so that if the company creates a bad environment, there will automatically be environmental costs. Usually, bad environmental conditions will result in damage. This damage can be grouped into direct degradation or direct degradation of the environment, and there is also indirect degradation. 1. Direct degradation means damage that occurs directly. We can see the damage directly in the existing environmental conditions. For example, air pollution is immediately created because of the smoke generated by the company's production machines. Then water pollution, contaminated water due to careless dumping of factory waste into rivers so that the water becomes contaminated. Second, temporary indirect degradation. That means it happens indirectly. This happens because companies use energy or raw materials excessively, especially when raw materials or energy come from natural sources. What's worse is that it can't be renewed quickly, where it takes quite a long time to renew it. When a company continuously exploits raw materials or energy, it will gradually result in damage, but the damage will not be felt immediately at that time. So the damage will be felt after this exploitation has been going on for quite a long time. Environmental costs are categorized into 4, namely prevention costs, detection costs, internal failure costs, and external failure costs. Companies are very aware that currently companies not only need to prioritize profits, but also need to prioritize their human resources who work in them and also need to develop environmental conditions. For example, there is concern for improving the surrounding environment so that production activities carried out by companies only prioritize profit without paying attention to the welfare of their employees and also do not care about the condition of the surrounding environment so that pollution is created which in the end, or its impact, will be felt again by the people who live nearby, factory area, or even wider than that. Therefore, now the company is prioritizing these 3 things: people, type, and planet, or what is usually termed triple bottom accounting. From triple bottom accounting, environmental cost becomes an important thing, something that the company needs to think about, pay attention to, and control. The first category is 1. Prevention cost. What does that mean? So prevention cost is prevention, so the costs associated with prevention don't let the company create waste, so there must be prevention at the start. What are these precautions like? Later we will look at the details of each of these costs, roughly what categories they fall into. 2. Detection costs. When the production process is running, the company must be able to detect the potential for environmental damage while the production process is running. 3. Internal failure costs. When the waste is finally created because it cannot be denied that companies carrying out production activities will create waste, it just depends on how much waste is created and how smart they are at managing this waste. For internal failure costs, meaning that this waste is still managed by the company in such a way and is not thrown out of the company. Meanwhile, for external failure costs, meaning that this waste has been thrown out of the company, so that later it will give rise to social costs that must be carried out by the company in order to deal with waste that has already been spread outside the factory.
This is the classification. The first for prevention activities, which can give rise to prevention costs. For the first prevention activity, evaluating and selecting suppliers. Suppliers must be evaluated and must be selected correctly so as not to provide suppliers and raw materials that are not hygienic or environmentally friendly, or that result in excess waste when produced, or that cause difficulties for the company in processing the waste produced. Then, evaluating and selecting pollution control equipment. This means that we must have maintenance to be able to control the level of pollution in the company, and it must be selected and evaluated carefully so that we don't just buy it, and it turns out that the equipment does not function as expected by the company. Designing process, so designing, maybe they can create standard operating procedures regarding waste disposal. Then designing product, don't let the product that turns out to be made later be not environmentally friendly so that it can cause damage in the future. Environmental damage, for example, makes a detergent. Then it can be said that this detergent is not environmentally friendly so that after it is used by consumers, then this detergent is used, it turns out it produces waste that pollutes water. This means that the components in making detergent must be considered to the extent that when the product is used in the future, it does not result in other environmental pollution. Then, carrying out environmental studies, for example, identifying what materials are environmentally friendly, which can be used for production activities, then what processing systems or methods are able to minimize the potential for creating waste. Then do auditing environmental risks, because our goal is to prevent pollution or pollution from occurring. Here it is necessary to audit, or in other words, map the potential risks that exist. Developing environmental management systems. So the point is that we have a system. For example, having a system related to standard procedural rules. For example, for waste disposal. What are the standard rules for production activities? For example, the goods they produce are goods that are quite dangerous for their employees, so the employees are equipped with protective clothing like that. For example, in the process of making chemicals in large quantities, like it or not, employees have to be equipped with equipment such as special clothes and gloves or perhaps masks to protect them from potential exposure to these chemicals. Then recycling products. Now there are many companies that design their products using recycling results, such as Nike. Nike designs its shoes from recycled waste, for example plastic waste, to be able to make Nike shoes, or for example like IKEA. IKEA also produces a lot of furniture from recycled waste. So it is one form of preventing the creation of pollution or factory waste. So doing recycle, or like cosmetic or skincare companies, some also ask their customers to collect skincare cosmetic bottles again to be recycled by the company using a process that definitely complies with their standard operational procedures. Then it would be good if the company also registered itself to be able to get its ISO 14001 certification, namely ISO related to the environment. Next is detection activities. So detection activities is when a company carries out production, the company is able to detect the potential for creating pollution or creating waste. So the process of auditing environmental activities still continues. Then, inspecting products and processes, don't let it happen when we have done it. Designing process of prevention activities. It turns out that when the implementation was not carried out carefully, it was not carried out according to what had been designed, resulting in the creation of more factory waste than what was planned in prevention activities. To prevent this means inspection is required. Then, developing environmental performance measures or indicators of measuring tools to see environmental performance. So factories or companies have indicators. When the company is compliant with environmental concerns, what are the indicators? So during the production process, it can be directly measured its performance. Then carry out testing for contamination to find out what products have contamination effects that can occur in the future. Then, if in prevention activities we just selected suppliers, in detection activities we need to do that verifying supplier environmental performance or re-verify to ensure that the supplier selected for the company is one that truly provides products that do not create excess waste for the factory. And make sure measuring contamination level or measuring the level of contamination, for example, they have a measuring standard if, for example, the pollution is already high, meaning the production level must be reduced so that the level of air pollution contamination does not get higher. Or, for example, periodically measuring the pH of the soil if, for example, it turns out that waste is being dumped into the ground. Or, for example, measuring using a radiation scale to know that, for example, waste is capable of providing radiation that is not good for society, which means it must be measured how to properly dispose of it, such as what radius it should be in, so that people are not exposed to the radiation. Then for internal failure activities, so waste has been created, but efforts are made not to throw it outside the company. The first is existence operating pollution control equipment. So to control pollution, this must be used. For example, there is a filter in the chimney so that when the smoke is forced to escape into the air, or more precisely out of the company, it is well filtered so that the pollution level is not high or even non-existent. Or for example, in water, in the form of wastewater, which is related to water pollution. So how can the wastewater be processed in such a way that when it is disposed of, it no longer contains waste? Then treating and disposing of toxic waste, the same as the previous one, so through this tool we try to manage it so that when the waste has to be thrown out of the company, it no longer contains waste or contains little waste. Maintaining pollution equipment, these pollution prevention equipment or waste processing equipment must always be maintained so that they can function properly and have a license. Usually companies have an AMDAL, environmental impact analysis, so when a company builds a factory that has the potential to generate waste, there is an analysis of its environmental impact. The AMDAL must be complied with by the company. If the company does not comply and causes protests from the surrounding community or even the local government, then there is potential for the business. The production process will be stopped. Then recycling scrap. When, for example, in the production process, there are product remains and they are not thrown away. And for example, if they are thrown away, they will contaminate them, so they have to be processed into other products. For external failure activities, this term means waste that is thrown out of the company when the company fails to carry out prevention, detection, internal failure activities steps. The company still has waste that causes pollution in the area outside the factory, meaning the company has to spend funds clean up the pollution. For example, the pollution that has been carried out has polluted the lake, so the company must be able to carry out a lake cleaning operation, cleaning up a polluted lake. Or, for example, in the sea, such as an oil refinery that leaks in the middle of the sea and will automatically spread pollution to the sea water. This is the responsibility of the company to spend funds to clean the sea until it is completely clean. There is no oil waste, cleaning up oil spills. Then, cleaning up contaminated soil. Because soil that has been contaminated means that the land around the community around the factory is unable to be planted because the nutrients are no longer suitable. Then there are accidents, for example, employee accidents, and they ask to be treated, and it becomes the company's responsibility. Setting personal injury claims, environmentally related. For example, employees are asked to process an item. The item cannot be processed with their bare hands, so they have to use protective equipment such as gloves, then also have to use a mask. But it turns out the company does not provide this protective equipment, so that in the end, one of the employees gets injured again, or is poisoned by the smoke, for example, because it is a chemical substance. Then, restoring land to natural state, namely changing contaminated areas to their original condition. When a company is known to create products that cause pollution to our society so that the clean water is contaminated, resulting in the clean water not being able to be used because it is no longer available, the water causing itching and so on, and that will definitely cause a decline in the company's image, losing sales due to poor environmental reputation. Using materials and energy inefficiently, exploiting raw materials too often, until one day the raw materials run out. Still part of external failure activities are societal costs or costs incurred by parties outside the company, for example by the government, by the community itself, or by the families of employees. Receiving medical care due to polluted air, losing employment because of contamination, losing a lake for recreational use, damaging ecosystems from solid waste disposal. Tutorial on preparing an environmental cost report. The steps for preparing an environmental cost report include 1. Gather all information on expenditures related to environmental costs for a given period. 2. Classify these costs into the 4 main categories: prevention costs, detection costs, internal failure costs, and external failure costs. 3. After collecting and classifying data, calculate the total for each cost category and document it in the report. 4. Explain how these costs affect the surrounding environment and the company's finances. For example, you can calculate the percentage of environmental costs relative to total production costs as an indicator of environmental cost efficiency. 5. Include recommendations on steps the company can take to reduce environmental costs in the future, such as adopting better waste treatment technology or implementing other environmentally friendly strategies.
At the end of 2022, Rise Chemicals began to implement an environmental quality management program. As a first step, it identified the following costs in its accounting records as environmentally related for the year just ended. In 2022, settling personal injury claims $2,100,000, treating and disposing of toxic waste $5,200,000, cleanup of chemically contaminated soil $1,500,000, inspecting products and processes $700,000, operating pollution control equipment $750,000, licensing facilities for producing contaminants $280,000, evaluating and selecting suppliers $150,000, developing performance measures $70,000, recycling products $85,000. Required. Prepared an environmental cost report by category. Assume that total operating costs are $70 million. First, we must categorize the costs incurred according to the classification of prevention costs, detection costs, internal failure costs, and external failure costs. 2. After that, the costs that have been categorized will be included in each costs category, such as evaluating and selecting suppliers and recycling products being included in prevention costs, and so on until finished. 3. Then we calculate the amount of these costs according to each category. 4. Then calculate the percentage by calculating the total costs divided by the total production costs and multiplied by 100%. 5. After calculating the percentage, don't forget to calculate all the overall costs and the overall percentage.
Analysis of environmental cost reports. From the data presented, there are several important points that need to be considered. Most of the company's environmental costs, 15.48%, are spent on addressing negative impacts that have already occurred, such as cleaning up polluted land and paying injury claims. This indicates that the company has not been effective enough in preventing environmental problems. The budget for prevention activities, such as supplier evaluation and product recycling, is relatively small, 0.34%. This suggests that companies may not have prioritized preventing environmental problems. The budget for detection activities, such as product inspection and performance measure development, is also relatively small, 1.1%. This suggests that companies may be less proactive in identifying potential environmental problems. That concludes our discussion on environmental cost reporting. It's essential to remember that environmental costs are not just numbers on paper. They represent a company's responsibility towards the environment and the surrounding community. A well-prepared report not only enhances transparency, but also contributes meaningfully to sustainability. Thank you.